Today you have me and Joe for session number one. Um, so here's our contact information. If, as you know, as I hope you know, you are welcome to contact us with any question. Joe and I work pretty closely together on a lot of things. So regardless of who you send the question to, we will make sure it gets to the person who can best answer that. So you don't have to worry about, unless your question is specifically state aid and penal fines or specifically law, um, toss them to either one of us, and we will make sure they get to whoever they need to get to, no matter what. Um, and then we have since we are going to be talking about some legal issues today, we have a disclaimer just to make sure that uh, even though we are going to be giving you a lot of information today, if you have questions about that information, it looks like I froze for a second there. Or, as I say, you see yourself in that information, in the position of when we say don't do this and you see you are doing it, we recommend that you contact your attorney or your other expert, whether it's a financial expert, for advice to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. The Millage series, as I said, we are starting today on April 6th with library funding and millages. But the rest of the series, there are 5 in total, are going to run through next week. We have campaigning with data, which is going to be Joe. Joe is going to come back and talk to you about presenting data as part of your factual information you're allowed to present as part of your campaign for your millage. Um, on the 20th, Ann Surink is going to be here to talk about legally navigating the millage process. April 27th, Shirley Bersama is going to talk about forming library yes committees and best practices. As you may know, Shirley's been around a long time, but she's also helped well over 100 millages, libraries in the state of Michigan, pass them. And in all the millages that she's assisted with, she's only ever lost like 2. So she is a good person to kind of touch base with and just get some tips. And then the last one is we have a panel of a variety of library people here in Michigan to talk to you about connecting with your community about your millage and again, kind of your factual uh, information that you can present and how to talk to people in your community who might not be really excited about a library millage or how to manage questions about things that perhaps the library has made mistakes on during your last millage or in the past several years to, kind of get your community to understand some of those things so that they still vote for your millage, even if they don't always agree with you. So that's our series. If you registered the one time, which you did for today, you are able to get into all of them. It's the same uh, Zoom address, so same time, same station each Monday. Okay. Joe, you want to talk about what you want to handle this slide?
Sure. So library funding in Michigan, and when we talk library funding, it's about 97 to 98% local funding. So not state income, not federal income, but funded by the community where the library is located, or through contracted areas. Some of the income comes from those as well. And one of the primary concerns that we look at, especially when, like I mentioned at the beginning, we're paying state aid, is that 3/10 of a mil in local support. So that is the ground floor base minimum of local support that will qualify you for state aid, and qualifying you for state aid gets you state grants, E-rate, and a lot of financial considerations that you wouldn't have if you didn't meet the 3/10 of a mil in local support. So we'll cover that today. We'll cover how much funding does your library need is kind of, it depends, right? It depends on what's going on in your community, the community needs, and um, gosh, everything, including co-op membership and what kind of services you're getting from your co-op. So it's going to be, there is no standard number for that. And I'll go through in one of our last slides, I'll show you how to calculate what a millage will bring based on the millage rate levied.
Okay.
Claire, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you did a good job. So one of the things you did, we're going to talk about is kind of setting the stage for what we're going to be doing. So the purpose of this this session is really just to kind of set the groundwork for, what a millage is basically, and how do you figure out if you need one, if you want one, how much of a one, and why these are important. So your establishment, as we talk often about, is important to everything in your library, but it very integrally affects your millage. So hopefully you all know that your Establishment Act or your establishment type is your library type based on the law that your library was formed under. Right? In Michigan, libraries can only be formed by municipalities. So your municipality would have had to form your library under the authority of a specific law. And within that law in Michigan, also, you can only levy millages if your millage is authorized by law. So that's why your establishment affects your millage. So there are two kinds of millages, roughly speaking. You have the kind of millage that your municipality can levy as part of their annual budget, right? So your township, your county, they all are able by statute, by constitution, to levy a millage, whether it's the county, the law that covers counties, the laws that cover townships, the laws that cover villages, the laws that cover cities, all of them incorporate the authority for the municipality to levy a millage without a vote to cover their budget, right? Some municipalities, as part of that millage, will include their library, right? So they'll include an appropriation. So when that happens, that means that that municipality is including the library within their own budget. So that would be an appropriation. That's not considered a library millage. Um, some instances, the law also says that because the Constitution places caps on how much property taxes a municipality can levy, that same law also says that the municipality can exceed those caps if the electorate votes for it. So, therefore, your municipality may put a library millage on the ballot in order to not worry about exceeding that cap, right? So those are all kinds of ad hoc millages. Those are not millages that are counted as part of, what we typically consider a library millage. Then the Library Establishment Acts provide the ability for libraries to go for dedicated millages. And these millages are millages that do not count as part of the statutory cap. So if your municipality is limited to, say 15 mills, the library millage is not, if it's done under the Library Establishment Act, does not count towards that municipal cap. It is considered a designated kind of separate millage. But your Establishment Act will dictate the extent to which you can have, like how much of a millage you can have, right? So you can't just go and have like a 5 mil millage or a 15 mil millage like your municipality on top of your municipality's cap. Your Establishment Act will specifically say, under your Establishment Act, can you have a dedicated millage? And if you can, here's the most that you could levy based on that millage. Now, because Michigan has approximately 11 different types of public libraries under about 7 different laws, each individual establishment type is a little different in what and how much they can levy, and in some cases, what type of millage it is. Now, so your establishment, in addition to your millage, it provides obviously your legal status, the ability for your uh, library to hire, to have bank accounts, etc. And it provides all that legal authority to your board and kind of indicates how your library should generally operate. As I mentioned, not all libraries are the same. The PA 164 lays out some very specific things about millages. So your library at PA 164, as I said, and districts can have dedicated millages that don't add to the general municipal tax limitation. Um, County library boards have the discretion to levy millages as part of their county millage or separate from their county millage, but still under that cap imposed by the county. Um, if you are a Section 1 city library, right? So PA 164 can have two different types of city libraries. A Section 1, which is a library with a 5, 7, or 9 member board that was appointed by the municipality. A Section 10A, which has a 6 member elected board, right? So the city Section 1, if you have an appointed board, you are probably, if you're in a city library, you are probably a Section 1 under PA 164. PA 164 Section 1 says that you can have a millage, an unvoted millage, at the discretion of your city council. So that's actually a very weird animal. It's a designated millage, doesn't count towards the cap of the city, but it's not a voted millage, which is extremely unusual in Michigan law. But the millage is at the complete discretion of the library of the county commission. The library board has no say in how much, in either whether that millage gets levied by the city and how much they levy. Totally under the discretion, and they have to do it every year. The city council has to do it every year. Now, once the money is levied and put in the library account, it is under the sole discretion of the library board. Um, so if a PA 164 wants a voted millage, they would have to negotiate with their city council to get one. And the same thing, that would then be through the ballot, through the election process, and subject to all the same laws that every other library is as far as campaigning for that millage and getting that millage. It's just the initial decision of can we have one and how much do we have is something you have to negotiate with your city. But if you're a 10A city library, the law specifically states that the library board controls all of that. Library board, it's their discretion how much to go for. It's their discretion whether to put one on the ballot. Same with a township under PA 164 and a village under PA 164. As far as amounts, again, you'd have to read your individual law, but for PA 164, they all have a total of 2 mills. City Section 1, it's 1 mill unvoted through the city council, 1 mill voted. The township, city Section 10A, village, all up to 2 mills voted. So if you are a department of your municipality, if you are a city home rule library, so that means that you are formed by charter or ordinance, but you are not a PA 164, you do not have a governing board, or your governing board doesn't fit within the parameters of PA 164, you do not levy the PA 164 millage. If you solely get your money from appropriations from your municipality, then that would mean that you do not have an authorization for a dedicated library millage. And any millage would have to come through your city and would be counted as part of that city's cap. Um, County and district library boards. Your district library board, it has total control. They can levy their own millages. They don't have to work with a municipality, or they totally have, the board has sole discretion. They can levy up to 4 mills on their board. School public libraries do not have statutory authority to levy any kind of millage. They used to, and that was removed at some point by legislation. So school public library only has the ability to gain money through their school district's budget. So if you have any questions about that or what your establishment is, strongly recommend you talk to your attorney. You can reach out to us to confirm your establishment. But because this can be very different and it can be very it can be very complex sometimes, that it's definitely a good idea to reach out and talk to your attorney. The one other thing you may have is you may have a county, or excuse me, a charter millage. There are many, particularly cities, that have charter millages written into their charters. And what essentially it says, it's usually under the taxation part of the charter. And a lot of times it will say that up to a certain, usually it's a mill, up to a mill can be levied um, during the annual, levy when the city levies their budget, their amount for their budget every year. A certain amount is also in addition to that levied for the library. So that's called a charter millage. Sometimes City PA 164 Section 1 libraries will roll that millage without a vote into a charter millage. Some, the charter just authorizes that money in addition to any other millage they have. So they're not doing it under the PA 164 authorization. So as I said, this can get a little complex. And if you have any questions about are you maxed out with your millage? Um, can you levy extra if you can get it into your charter? All of that would be something that you would want to talk to your attorney about because there are some very weird situations out there, and you really have to look at it on an individual basis. Never assume your establishment. I can't tell you how many libraries have come to me thinking they're one thing, but they're really something else. So, especially if you're a city library, please, please, please verify your establishment before you assume that you can do certain things. One thing about a city Section 1 library is that under the law, you should not have a voted millage for two mills. You should have one mill without a vote, up to a mill, and one voted mill. So if you have something different, again, that would be something to talk to your attorney about. Or if you wish to have something different than that, that would be something to talk to your attorney about. If you're not sure of where, your establishment documents, contact us at LM. We can help you with that. If you have your establishment documents, please read them. If you are a district library, read your agreements, read your district library agreements, read the statute, and read your charter ordinances if you are a charter township or if you are a city, because those are going to really hold a lot of answers to your questions involving your funding and your possible funding. Okay. Um, I'm going to let Joe take this slide.
Well, I'm reading your first bullet here, and yeah, definitely one of the ways you're proving that you've got that 3/10 of a mil in local support is on the annual report state aid application. And what happens with that is after you're finished with the reporting period, I take all of that information and I put it into our financial system, wherein I have all of the taxable values for all of your served areas, and it shows me, well, one, total income, total local income collected, and compares it against the total taxable value at 3/10 for your entire area. So when a library's total local income exceeds the total 3/10 of a mil requirement, that's full state aid. What happens, and I see it every year, and this year we have some libraries that got partial state aid, not full state aid. And when we see that, that means that the total local income did not exceed the 3/10 of a mil requirement. So what I'll do at that point is look at each individual service area that makes up the full library service area. That's contracted areas and legal service area. And I'll pull away what I try to do. My ultimate goal is to give a library state aid for the greatest number of population I possibly can. So what I'll do is I'll start taking populations away, which reduces the 3/10 of a mil requirement, and the income left from the library and local support will, what I'm trying to get it to do is exceed that 3/10 of a mil obligation for any area that is left. And that's what partial state aid is. As soon as I get a number where the 3/10 of a mil in local support is exceeded, that's when I can pay whatever population remains. So when you look at your really, I mean, I guess it's easy to say if you have a millage that exceeds 3/10, that area will definitely meet state aid because three-tenths of a mil is the minimum threshold. Where libraries run into trouble is when they have a legal service area that may have a mill, or 2 mils or 0.75 mils, anything above the three-tenths of a mil. That legal service area is going to be fine, but they may have added some contracted areas that maybe the financial consideration is just penal fines. And they don't meet the three-tenths of a mil for that area. So in that situation, you're left hoping that the millage from the legal service areas is going to exceed it for everyone. And that means that the legal service area is really carrying those populations in terms of um, their financial share, approaching that three-tenths of a mil. So what I'm looking at is, and you can do this too, and I think we mentioned this computation form quite a few times in this
Yeah,
presentation.
I have a link to it here. You want me to go to it, Joe?
Oh, yep, yeah. Why don't you go to the computation form? So the computation forms that are out there right now are FY 24, 25, and 26, and that's based on our fiscal year. So you can look yourself up and see what the three-tenths of a mil and
Uh,
full
I'm
taxable
just,
valuation is for your area. Is it not loading, Claire?
yeah, I've got one. It's to the link. Do you want, I'm gonna pick one.
Oh yeah, yeah. Just if you want to share
Yeah,
what that
yep.
form is. Um, what it's going to show you right now, so if you look at the FY 26, since I'm pretty much finished with that first state aid payment, your library will be in there and it'll show you the taxable value currently. Um, and I know
So
Claire,
it should be up now.
yep, it is. Go ahead
Okay.
and grab anybody.
Okay.
It's
Let's
on 25, so you can change it to 26.
oh, okay. I wasn't sure if 26 was up yet.
Yep, everybody's done. So you can type in any library.
Uh,
So now, when I start paying
let's
state aid, if you're
do
looking at this in early March, your library might not be on here yet for the current year because it just means your payment hasn't been processed yet. But now that everyone has been, everyone should show up on here for the 26 year. Okay, looking at Cass. I can go ahead and scroll down. Oh, it's up. Claire, you just
oh,
need to. There you go. So you can see Cass has a lot of, well, it looks like all legal service area.
oh,
And you can
they don't have.
see,
Let me grab one with a contracted area. I didn't realize they were
okay,
didn't have a contracted area.
Escanaba has a whole bunch. See, I'm trying to think. Most of them
I'll
have one or
just
two.
I'll just go to Escanaba.
We know Escanaba has a bunch.
Yeah,
So
there we
you
go.
can see there, so there's Baldwin Township, and you can see that there's a zero in legal population, which means this is a contracted area. It wasn't part of the library's establishment when the library formed. So look at their taxable value, it's 41,745,450, and three-tenths of that is 12,524. So for that municipality to meet the three-tenths of a mil obligation on its own, they would need to provide at least $12,524. You see that they provided 2,150, and that's most certainly penal fines, their share of penal fines. So penal fines are dispersed by the county to the libraries directly based on the number of people they're serving total. And then you take that number, the total number of penal fines given, divided by the served population. And this can get complex, not in Escanaba's case, because all of these are Delta County, but some contracted areas may be in a different county. So you run that per capita calculation based on the counties. So since these are all Delta, we would take the full amount of penal fines given by the county, divide it by the full population, and that gives us a per capita number. And then you would take that per capita number and multiply it in Baldwin's case by the 700 people in the counted population. And that'll give you a figure. So it looks like the figure for this year for Baldwin Township was $2,150. Now they don't meet their three-tenths, but Claire, can you scroll down to the bottom there?
Yep.
Now you see the total three-tenths of a mil obligation for Escanaba is $323,716. They brought in local income this year 545,901. So they're clearly over the three-tenths of a mil cap. So that library will get full state aid. And Indeed, it did. You can see the payment right there. So in a lot of cases, you'll see the legal service area will end up covering a lot of the municipalities. Where we run into trouble is if Escanaba City wasn't providing all of that revenue and they were providing much closer to the 3/10 of a mil, a lot of these areas would have to be removed because the obligation, the total income would not exceed the total 3/10 obligation. So I'd remove them. You can see on the right-hand side of this sheet all of those yeses. And if you scroll to the top of that heading, Claire, means those areas were included in the calculation for state aid. So if you scroll to the bottom real quick, Claire, so you can see their full population was 25,482. And that's the rate that's the population that was used, multiplied by that 0.268053 down there on the right-hand side for library payments. And that's the amount that they were given. So in 16.4 and 16.2, 16.2 means direct state aid. That's the library's state aid. They can use it for any library purpose. The 16.4 is also known as indirect state aid, and typically that is the fund that the cooperative that you're a member of is going to charge you that for your dues. Or maybe they charge part of it for the dues and then the rest of it you use to buy into cooperative services. Oh, we've looked all over
Yeah.
there. Okay.
Oops. Yeah, hold on. I gotta get back to.
So that computation form is very useful. Anyone can get to it. It is public information. So, like we just looked up Escanaba, you could look up any of the libraries, any of the public libraries, and anyone with an internet connection can see that as well. So, keep that in mind as well.
Okay. So this slide here pretty much goes over what Joe just said. So,
Oh,
uh, Joe, you want to explain to them what
yeah.
is local support? What's
So,
local
local
income?
support, local income, that is your appropriated tax if you don't have a millage, or it's your millage income. It also includes the penal fine income. It includes any capital income from local sources. So, local government capital income or private capital income. It does not include anything to do with state income or federal income. Um, one of the big generally the largest source of this is your millage income or your appropriated tax income. And then donations, fines, fees, even your replacement fees for damaged materials counts as local income and local support. If you're given a donation by your friends group it doesn't really matter, to do something in the library, that counts as local support as soon as they give you those funds.
Mhm. Okay. So, ensuring that you're looking at your money and seeing if your millage is what you would like to levy is going to give you enough for what you need. So one thing to consider is most millages are in effect for a particular number of years. So you want to have, when you look at your millage and what you're going to ask for, there's a tendency to, well, we want to ask for the least amount that we need, which is fiscally responsible, but you also need to consider that's what we need right now, right? If this millage is going to go for 10 years, what are we going to need in 2035 or 2032? Um, so it definitely is a balance of considering, okay, this is what we need now, but we also need to be realistic about how prices change, how things can increase, so that we can make sure that we're going to have enough for the extent of our millage. Um, so there's different things to look at. You want to look at your taxable values, not only for your legal service area, but also for the areas that you serve, particularly if, as Joe says, your contracts are not for enough money to realistically cover the cost of service to those areas, right? So if you're serving an area and maybe, you only have four card but you serve a large population. A lot of libraries will say, well, penal fines are enough because we don't have many cardholders from that area. Well, consider, critically, is that going to remain, or do you think that is a reason to think, are you planning a in service, or do you know whether there's going to be changes in a school district boundary, Or is there big manufacturing that might occur in that area, like some data center being built or something that's going to increase perhaps the population of that area and more families with children who might want access to a library? So some of this definitely is looking ahead and figuring out, okay, you know, how might taxable values look? How have they looked in the past, and how that might they look in the future? So you can get a sense of how fluctuation. So in the last 5 years, have the taxable values fluctuated heavily or not? And look at your same budget. How has your budget fluctuated over the past several years? Look at your state aid and your penal fine amounts over the past several years, as well as, are you getting PPT? Are you getting small business tax reimbursements? Do you have an endowment that gives you money every year? What is the principle of that endowment at? Are you going to be can you continue to expect the same amount of income from that endowment? Or is the principal dwindling so that in 3 years, you might not have that same level of income? Talk to your financial advisor or the people that manage your investment. If you have it in Michigan Class, or talk to the people there and be like, okay, do you have projections for the next few years of what possibly, nothing is guaranteed. We just had this discussion in my family with our financial, because we're looking towards retirement. So it's like, well, how can we expect this to grow? Well, they can't guarantee anything, but generally they have some kind of, general assumption based on historical data. Um, and then if you receive things like, wind farm payments or casino payments, look at the amount of money you've been receiving for those so far, and what is the likelihood that that's going to continue. And then lastly, look at your contractual payments. When you're looking at your contracts, should some of these be revisited? Do you have a municipality that's really been kind of getting very lucky with you and getting a lot of service, but not paying very much for it? Maybe it's time to revisit some of these contracts in order to get more money out of them. Or if it's an area that is really using a lot of resources, maybe it's time to talk to them about possibly getting a millage to help pay for the library. And there's multiple ways that that can be done as well. Joe, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Just a couple of things. One of the things that it kind of tends to blindside us because the Michigan Department of the Treasury will only use decennial census numbers. So when we hit the next decade, so in 4 more years,
Ah,
that population is going to shift, and it will be the first time you're seeing a shift because Treasury will not use population estimates. So we're not seeing any movement in most cases for 10 years. Now all of a sudden you had an area where you were getting a higher rate for penal fines for if you were doing contracts based on population served outside of penal fines even, and that population either goes way up or goes way down. It's not something we think about very often because it only really hits us just because of the way the Treasury works every 10 years. So that's something to consider. Where's your population moving to? And again, you won't see it until, 2030, but it's something to look for, looking out at. And there was something else, Claire, that you said that struck me, and it's left my head.
well, you could pop in
Hold on.
anytime. Remember
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Oh gosh. Well, it was a good point, and I'll think of it.
Eh,
I'll
Well,
come back to
something
it.
else to consider is that, we talk about contracts. Millages can only be increased or decreased every, however many years you have your individual millage set to expire. But contracts can be, negotiated at any time.
Yes, and you
So
said the
that's
magic word that unlocked it in my brain. We have contracts. I've seen plenty of them that were negotiated 15, 20 years ago. That this may just be my opinion, but don't let a contract go for 20 years. They should be looked at way more frequently than that. I think 5 years is probably the longest I'd be willing to go.
Mhm.
Um, and so that is definitely something to keep in mind. If your institutional memory is, oh, we've always served these people, that means there's a contract somewhere. And
right?
when was it signed? So we've seen them signed in 82 and they're
And
still in operation.
in
So,
fact, recently there was one that was signed in the 60s.
right,
That is so it's still
right.
going on.
So yeah, don't let them go that long without revisiting.
Yes.
Even
Um,
if you want to keep the terms the same, write a new
right.
contract with, modern dates on it.
Right. And I mean, and it's also possible if you're looking around and you're saying, okay, how much millage should I get? And you have a municipality near you that is you're dealing with in a contract, take just a general idea of, well, what is their kind of prognosis for their future? Like, are they growing now? Do you see a lot of movement? Are they growing now? Are their schools getting bigger? Because that also can be an indicator. Well, okay, if I don't want to deal with it right now because I'm trying to work on my millage, but maybe next year I need to really look at this contract and revisit it. Um, because, again, you want to just be fiscally kind of strategic. It's not about, we don't, you can't help people, but it's about you want to make sure that the library is getting fairly compensated for services it's providing for many, many reasons. So, do you go for a perpetual millage or do you go for a time limited millage? So, a perpetual millage is a millage that um, not most libraries can go for, and what it is essentially you get your millage, they pass it, and then that's it forever. The millage, you always can live with that millage. You never have to go for a renewal. Um, there's good and bad. Like, and you might think right away, oh, that would be great. Well, the problem with that is if you need to revisit it, there's plenty of libraries that have perpetual millages from like the 40s or the 60s, and now it's not enough money for them. So now they're in the position where they have a community that thinks, well, we passed the millage, we don't have to worry about it anymore. So they have to now look at the optics of trying to get more money when they have a community that says, hey, we already gave you a millage. Why do we have to give you another one? And that can be almost more difficult than trying to renew a millage and increase it. Trying to say we want a second millage, just from the standpoint of how people think, can be a little bit trickier. The other problem is that if you are a city or a township library now, and you think, hey, someday we might want to be a district. Well, if you change your establishment, that perpetual millage could be in danger. And so you have the potential that you could lose that millage when you reestablish. It gets, again, situation, it depends on the millage, it depends on a lot of factors, but it means you might have to reopen that millage because if you become a district, all members of the district have to pay the same amount. You can't have some of the district paying one thing and some of the district paying the other. So again, that's something that you would discuss with your attorney. So that's one of the things to factor in if you're thinking of a perpetual millage. Now, again, all of this has pluses and minuses. If you're in a very tax adverse area and you have this little kind of opening that you can get a perpetual millage, and you talk to your attorney, maybe that is a good thing for you. Maybe that's a thing you do. But again, this would be something to think about very strategically. If you go for a time limited millage, well, how long a time period do you go for? As I said, libraries are all over the place. Some libraries have 20 or 30-year millages. Some libraries go by tens. Some libraries go by fours. Some go by sixes or eights. It really depends on your individual community. And how long do you think that you can go with a set budget, right? Is 10 years too long because you might be in flux and that you might need more money? Um, or is that just the right amount of time? Do you not expect a lot of change? So again, there's, obviously most people don't want to have to go for a millage every 2 years, right? Because it's not the most fun thing to do. So these are also some of the factors that you need to weigh. Um, uh, but perpetual millages can be extremely stable, right? Once you get it, you have it. Okay. We encourage you to view your library's computation form, as Joe has mentioned. So when you're estimating your local income, Joe walked through the computation form. Um, This should include all your various types of income that you receive. You also probably would want to take a look at your data report from your annual report that you can look at through UnlitPass. And Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. Can you tell them if they have wind farm or they have casino payments or they have some of these other PPT, where
Mhm.
would those numbers be reflected on this? Would those be counted as local income or
Yes.
not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the wind farm PPT would be other local government income, and that would be reported on your for all the library directors in here that you know the annual report as well as I do. That'd be part five, operating income in the first column, first row, four columns over, uh, other local operating income. Yes, yeah. So that would be on your report. All of those considerations. Rent zone would not be because rent zone is state. So rent zone is going to be part of your state income. So it would not count as local support if you got rent zone money. Pretty much it's rule of it's easy to kind of figure out if it comes from the state, it's state income. If it comes from the federal government, it's federal income. And if it comes from your local government, it's local income and local support. If it comes from a private foundation coming to you, that's still local support. All of that would count toward that those local income requirements. So what Claire's got on the screen here is kind of a stripped down old school version of the computation form she just showed you on the using that website, that link. So yeah, this is just any city, forest, forest county, but it's got the typical layout of the computation form. It's showing the population, what's contracted, what's legal. That piece on the left is showing the certification requirements for the library director and support staff based on the specific library's class level. So you see that when you look at the web form as well on the left, that is the staffing requirements for state aid. So it's kind of a blended sheet. So it's got your financial and your staffing on here.
Mhm.
Rather have it in one place than having to search for it in a couple different places. But again, the one that Claire showed you is available to everyone. It's right on our state aid, Library of Michigan state aid page. It's open information, so anyone can get to that. Like I mentioned, you can look right now at 3 years worth, 24, 25, and 26. And if there's also the ability, you'll see it when you look at it to download a PDF option. That's typically what folks will do to give a nice clean sheet to their board members. But I mean, you could take a screenshot of it if you wanted to, or a print screen. But you can use that for your own purposes. But yeah, definitely be familiar with that sheet and familiar where it lives.
So we do have a question about the Headley rollback. Um, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because that could be a whole separate um,
Yeah.
presentation. So the Headley rollback essentially came out of a constitutional amendment years ago that required um, the idea was to enable taxes to kind of go along with housing values, so taxable values. But what it does is it quote unquote rolls back or reduces the amount of millage by a certain fraction. So that's why you may get a millage for one, but you end up only being able to levy zero point 0.9. And because those amounts can change, when you renew your millage, you may end up having it roll back more than you anticipated. But so one of the things to look at is what you want to factor into, and you can talk to your auditor or you can talk to your financial person, is to look at, okay, how much do we need to levy to overcome some of that we're losing on the Headley in terms of if you're looking at a millage you had some years ago and you want to increase it now. If you want to go from you had levied a mill and you're only getting zero point 0.9 and you say we want to make sure we get that full mill, um, you have the option of getting the a Headley override, which is a millage, it's an additional millage, which is only for the amount of money that between what you're actually levying under Headley and what the voters approved for you to levy, that 1 mil. Um, for a while, they were really popular. Now we still kind of see them once in a while. There seems to be they're not as popular because using a that idea of another millage sometimes is not as popular with voters. Um, but if you're going for a whole new millage, you may want to go for more than you originally were so that when you get that rollback, you're at the amount that you were hoping to get. So again, that's something to talk about with your financial professional to kind of narrow down exactly what that is. Um, there have been many ways there have been many attempts to get rid of Headley. And I know right now there are discussions in the legislature. A lot of entities want to get rid of Headley. A lot of the municipalities want to get rid of Headley. So the hope is that at some point this will go away, but right now it's not. Um, the best way to explain this to voters, how do we maintain the 3 mils? Yeah, if you have a point 0.3 mil now, and it's not up for renewal, the only way to do it would be a Headley override, which would be an additional millage. The only way you can really explain it to voters is to just give them the facts. That there's this legislative requirement. So when we levy a mill, we don't get a mill. And so in order for us to get a mill, we have to go for an additional millage. So yeah, it does get complicated. There really isn't an easy way to explain it other than what I just said. We are going to be having, so the May 4th panel is all about those kinds of conversations. So that would be something, and I'll make sure the panel discusses that, is how do you talk to your voters about a Headley override to make it as clear as possible. Now, as a government entity under the Campaign Financing Act and the Michigan campaign laws, you can only campaign with factual information. So that would be probably one of the easiest ways to do this would to be put it on paper and create like a handout that says, okay, Headley, in the citation, where they can find Headley or the language from Headley. Um, and then here is what we have, here is what we can levy, here is what we want to levy so that we get this amount of money. Like probably the best way to do it would be to actually just spell it out as clearly and simply as possible on a handout or on your website so that your voters can clearly see it. Because numbers don't lie. Sometimes when you start talking about things, it gets convoluted and everybody kind of understands things from a different point of view. But once you write down numbers, it becomes more apparent. Joe, do you have any suggestions for that question?
Yeah, I'd like to say that, well, it's usually not a problem with the whole 3/10 of a mill value because why would a library go for the 3/10 of a mill millage? They'd want to be, much, much higher than that because we know that that 3/10 of a mill is the absolute floor. That is not, I wouldn't try to, I don't know. I just get the sense I wouldn't try to run a library on 3/10 of a mill, a minimum half a mil or a mil. But that's me looking at it from a different perspective and looking at the averages and the median values and what's coming across the annual reports every year and what libraries are able to do with the funding they've got. But these last couple of years we had a handful that went for 3/10 or 0.36 or 0.41, very low, just trying to maintain funding. Some of those were renewals. Some of them were, looks like three of them were Headley overrides, like Claire was talking about. Um, I don't know. My way of trying to explain it to the public would be without being flippant, with all sincerity, kind of coming from the point of view of you get what you pay for. And costs for a lot of the things that libraries are doing that are very popular, like the electronic collections, those costs are going way up. Um, and you want to be able to provide the best you can for your community. You want a high quality library. And unfortunately, that does cost money, but it
Hmm.
costs per taxpayer very little money. And you're putting all of your finances in the same pot, you know, to build something great. And that's kind of the tack that I would take to talk to the public.
Hmm.
Kind of
Yeah.
for me, the Pollyanna version of we're all
Yeah,
in
I
this
agree.
together and we're going to build this great thing.
Yep. And you also, I mean, part of it too, as I said, is looking ahead. I mean, look at what's happened. If you're just now coming off a millage cycle, think about the things that have happened in the last 3 or 4 years, right? You had
Yeah.
ESTA, okay, which now you have to pay for paid leave. You have increased minimum wage, right? So that's something else, obviously, that you factor in the next few years. Minimum wage is going to keep going up. Um, there's, the bill in the legislature. Well, right now it's before the Supreme Court as to whether or not the enrolled bill, which means it was voted on, but the House and Senate both agreed to it, so it just hasn't gone to the governor. Um, and this bill would require public employers to pay 80% of the healthcare costs of their employees. Um, right now, it's in limbo. Will the governor veto it? Maybe, but it's never been given to the governor. And so right now, it's one of 9 bills before the Supreme Court to determine whether or not it has to be put in front of the governor. So if it's put in front of the governor and the governor signs it, well, that's another big increase, money increase. So if you look at even, there's a lot of things out of your control. So you want to allow for the possibility of some of these things that could come out of right, left field in terms of budget. And how do you know that? Well, part of predicting the future is looking at the past, right? So, that's why a lot of this is research that, you just it and talking to your professionals and your experts, like your accountants and your lawyer to kind of help you figure out, well, you can't ask for the world, right? So it's balancing. This is what we think we're going to need based on the population we have, based on our contracted areas, based on how we think that things are going to look in over the next 5 years with taxable values and the amount of money, publishers are going to charge us. Um, and then just kind of come up with a number that you think is going to cover that. And that's, I mean, admittedly, that's extremely hard.
Yeah. Yeah. What I would do to try to come up with, because it's all based on taxable value, right? Um, as Claire mentioned before, look at your taxable values over 4 or 5 years and then apply a rate of change formula to those years. And you should get a reasonable prediction of what the taxable value is going to go up to for the following year, and then
Hmm.
base your numbers off of the results of that formula, the rate of change, to see where
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
likely to be going. Most of the time, taxable value goes up. You don't see it go
Yes.
down very often. So it's most likely going to be a little higher than whatever it is for this year.
Right. Right. And then that factors into your headly too. If it's
Right.
going to be a little bit higher, then that can affect your headly calculation. So uh and we have some resources and stuff at the end of our slides. I'll go out there and see if I can find a resource that will give you some tips on this in a little bit more straightforward manner to how to um, anticipate or estimate some of these changes as far as taxable values and Headley goes. Um, and
Well, and Claire, you discovered something about taxable values recently with the Treasury. You used to be able to just pull those from the website. Now you have to request them. So that
right with
links on the bottom down here too for the
the
taxable
right
values.
the L 4029s, which is it's the form that your county treasurer has to fill out and give to Treasury. And they are, well, it's a kind of a group of forms, and each form is filled out by each entity, each millage um, requesting entity. So, say your township your township treasurer would have to list all of the millages that they levy for the township. So that would include the library levies. If you're a district, you would fill out your own L4029. What it includes is it'll have the taxable value on it. It'll have the amount of millage that you were approved for by the voters. It will have the amount that it's reduced by Headley. And then it will have the amount that you levied last in the last year. These are done every year. And then the millage, when the millage was elected, and then when the millage is due to end. So these are all available through Treasury. It used to be they had them just all posted and you could just click on your county and then get your L4029. Now you have to request them from Treasury and then they will send you a sheet with the links on it that you can access those. Um, they're kind of a year behind. Like right now you can get 2025, but as individual millage holders for your own information, um, you can talk to your treasurer. So your township treasurer should have copies of your L4029 for your individual municipal, for you, if you're a municipal library. And if you're a district, you should have copies of your L4029. Now, if you're interested in seeing your neighbors' L4029, so like the municipalities you contract with, then you can get those from Treasury. And there's a link in the resources. And those I find very handy because they do give you the Headley amount, how much it was rolled back by Headley in terms of the mills. And so um, that is that's helpful. And you did not derail
Oh
um,
no.
the discussion. That's exactly what these are for. So please don't hesitate to talk about it. And we will, I'm sure, revisit Headley. I'm sure when Ann talks, we will revisit Headley. When we have the panel, we will revisit Headley because this is a question that I get a lot is about Headley. And I know that's something nobody likes. So hopefully at some point it will go away, but there's no guarantees for that. Okay, this last slide here. One of the questions we get a lot is how do I know how much money my potential millage will yield? Like, how do I know if I get 1 mil or 1.5 mil? How much money will I get? And this is just the straight calculation, so it doesn't include Headley. The
Right.
Headley calculation is complicated, so I will get information on that for you so you can at least kind of estimate how much Headley might reduce it. But I'm going to let Joe discuss this particular slide.
Right. So this is fairly simple math. If you're going for a point 0.3 mil, you're just going to take 0.0003 multiplied by whatever Treasury is saying the taxable value of that area is. And that will tell you if one, you voted in a millage for level three and it remain or for point 0.3 and it stayed at point 0.3, not including Headley, like Claire said. This is the amount of money that you would get out of that area. So when you're looking at that, you're not going to look by total taxable value for your entire library, like you can find on the computation form. You're going to multiply that by each individual municipality that's going for that millage. So likely it'd be your legal service area, your contracted areas probably don't have that millage, unless you're requiring that for service. Do it by municipality. So I mean, 1 mil would be 0.001 times taxable value. It's basically just whatever your rate is reduced to that 10th value multiplied by the taxable value, and it will give you what that is. So it's fairly simple. And we can help if you have questions about that. We can run you through that. And then I just included a link back to the Treasury's taxable valuations page, which does tell you that if it's from before 2018, you can see all of the taxable valuations, but after that, you have to request them.
Mhm.
But that at least takes you to the page where you can make that request.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And they're
and
pretty
then,
good at responding. They do respond fairly
yeah,
quickly.
it's just one more step you've got to do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but that state aid computation form, you're gonna hear about this over and over and over again. Best if you bookmark that somewhere because it is useful and it's nice to have something like that at your fingertips.
And it's very useful, like for your board,
Yeah,
because it tells them right away, look, you guys don't want to, you guys think that, well, we've always had a contract with X township next to us and they're friends with us and we always think we should serve them. And then they see the numbers. And
yeah.
Joe and I have been at public meetings where we see the looks on the faces of the board members when they see this, and then it's like, oh hell no, we don't care how much we like them. They have to pay.
Right. Where their 3/10 of a mil value would be about $220,000 and they're paying 4 grand.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
turns some heads.
And the local the so the and the local the legal service area is paying, $100 per family or $100 per taxpayer. And
Right.
then, when you calculate it out, this municipality is paying like $10,
Yeah. And that happens
and
a lot. And part of it is on us as library people. We want to serve as many people as we can. But one, we're government entities. A public library is not a charity. Service costs money, and you want to
right.
provide the best service you can. Well, that's going to cost you. So it's best
Yep.
to collect that money. And I mean, it's not like you're hoarding it. You're using it for that
Right.
very population that
Right.
wants the service. Um,
Well, and there's other, if you have partnerships, you have a partnership
sure.
with your school district. That's great. You give every, student in the school district a card. Well, if they're not all in your legal service area, but you have a lot of heavy usage, that's something else that you have to factor in your budget.
Yeah.
Especially as there are school districts that are starting to consolidate. So if you, and as time goes on and the demographics of our state changes, right? Unless we have a really big shift in the amount of young families or children that are born in Michigan, like many other areas of the country, you're going to see fewer and fewer students. But if you happen to live in an area where it does not, it's different than that, or you have a big manufacturing, or you have some attribute where it's going to really encourage young families in your particular area, then you may see, where schools, your school consolidates, but you're the school that's getting more students. Um, and so you might have to see, well, I might have to factor that in. So there's a lot of things to keep your eyes on here. And one of them is, at the very least, make sure that you're getting adequately compensated for the services that you provide. Doesn't mean you have to gouge anybody, right?
No,
It could be as
don't gouge
simple as,
anybody.
right, it could be as simple as making sure that your non-residency charges are appropriate, right? You're not just doing $10 for your non-residency card. You're charging an appropriate amount. Uh, that way, if push comes to shove and you have to, mess with a contract, you can always say, you know what, your people can come pay non-residency card. That way, you're still offering service, but not everybody's getting it for free. It can also be that you have a sliding scale for non-residency.
Right.
Contracts can be looked at on a large amount of levels, right? You can contract for, flat amounts. You can contract for however many members of the community get cards. There's a lot of ways you can contract that can work for both the municipality and the library. And you still get, if not the full amount, you get, better funded or at least adequately funded. So it doesn't always have to be like a horrible thing.
Right. I'm just waiting, and we haven't. I don't think I've seen this yet. Maybe you have, Claire. I'm waiting for the contract where community or municipality X provides fire services and municipality Y provides the library service. Because I
There
mean,
actually is one
are
like
there a
that.
couple like that? Because
There's at least one.
it's a sort of a
Um,
barter kind of a
yeah, there was one that involved cemetery maintenance,
interesting.
and in part for part of what the library provided. And that's still value earned,
Yeah,
right? So depending on the kind of library you are, that could still be very beneficial.
it's very
And
much a
not,
negotiation.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's another
Absolutely.
thing to bring up, Claire. I think it is a negotiation, and it's perfectly permissible to say no.
Yes. Yes. And if you have a partnership and it's huge, well, there's nothing wrong with asking the school district to kick in some money, especially if you're talking about a lot of staff time. I know at least one library that closes the library to members of the community so that schools they work with can come in. So depending on exactly what your individual situation is, there is nothing wrong with asking people who are outside of your legal service area to, because it's a business transaction. You want us to do this for you? We're happy to do it, but this is what we need in return. And as Joe said, it could be in kind, right? It could be in kind
Sure.
payments. Um,
One quick note talking about legal service area. If you are ever comparing this to any of the federal financial data for libraries, bear in mind that what they consider legal service area is what we consider legal service area plus contracted municipality. So at the federal level, legal service area is everybody you serve, whereas we've got it broken down into the area that established the library and contracted areas.
right. The have to serve versus the may serve.
Yes, yes.
Um, and also, if you have a problem with obtaining millages, or you're in an area where your municipality is like, no, we don't do millages, um, looking at contracts is a way to get some more stable income. And I don't mean, again, we're not gouging, but again, income that is for services given. Fair market value is kind of what the legal term is. Okay, we are at 3:09. We have till 3:30 for questions. So we've left some time for questions. If anybody has any additional questions about, trying to figure out how much millage to go for, what you're allowed to have, different kinds of millages, where your money comes from. Anybody have any of those kinds of questions? Sometimes I get asked who's responsible for asking for a millage. Generally, it's the library, but there are some certain weird situations where if you have, like, some libraries have contracts with municipalities that includes a millage, which is perfectly fine. If that's the situation, then it's that contracted municipality that's responsible for getting their own millage. The library would not run that campaign.
You're probably going to talk about this in other sessions, but can you talk a little bit about what happens when on a ballot you go, let's say you go for 1 mil, but then the taxing authority actually decides to only levy 0.75.
So there is the possibility, and this happens a lot with cities, obviously. It's, in townships, there are townships that attempt to do this, but legally, it's generally the cities that have the authority for this. Is that you may have a library gets a mill, they're voted in. So you have a mill voted, then reduced by Headley, so maybe zero point 0.9 something. And your municipality, the city, decides that they're not going to levy more than zero point 0.5. So even though you have the capacity for zero point 0.9, your city is only going to levy up to 0.5. And that's really a negotiation issue with the city. That's something for your board and the director to approach city council and say, okay, this is not working for us, and here's why. Um, and depending on the ballot language, but a lot of times, especially with the city section one, the reality is it's a negotiating process between the city and um, the library. Now, if you're a township library or a county library, although it can happen with a county library too, um, if you're a village library under PA 164 and you have that same issue where you have a municipality or you're a district that works, we have some districts that are small, right? It might be the township and the city of a particular area, and the city is still handling the money, right? So if your municipality is trying to impose upon you the levy of a millage under the total amount, and they don't have the authority to, then that would be something to discuss with your attorney. Because some municipalities feel they have authority to do certain things they do not have the authority to do. And if you're in a position where you're very well funded and you don't feel like you need to levy the full amount of your millage every year, that's perfectly fine. But if sometimes you're in the position where you really could use to levy your full levy, but for whatever reason, either your board, if you're a director, or your city is not permitting it. And a lot of times those are, again, conversations that should be had with the other party and your financial professional and your attorney to say, look, this is the way it should be done. Okay. How does fund balance play into the amount of the millage request? That's a very good question. So your fund balance is the amount of money left over in a year after you expend your budgeted amounts. So if you budgeted for more than you ended up needing, what's left over is called your fund balance. Many entities deal with that fund balance in a different way. Um, and again, sometimes establishment can play into this. So usually the fund balance would be like your cash in your checking account, right? Or your library bank accounts. Um, you should have between 2 and 6 months of, cash of value in your of income in your fund balance that's easily accessible to the library. So that's liquid, that's in cash so that if something happens, right? So you don't get your millage at the first try, or there's a natural disaster, or there's something that happens unexpectedly that puts the library at a financial need. You can dip into that fund balance. It's like your emergency fund. Right? You can dip into that fund balance to cover library expenses until your millage passes or until you are recovered from the natural disaster or whatever. Many libraries, particularly library boards, have an idea that the more money they squirrel away, the better it looks that they're managing public funds. And that's not true. Um, if you have a huge fund balance, so if you have cash in your library accounts that is more than 6 months of operational expenses, then I would take the extra, so more than 6 months of operational expenses, and either put it in a capital fund, like allocate it. The idea is that you want to allocate it, put it in a capital fund, put it in, invest it, or put it in another fund that's dedicated, a building fund, to something specific. Because that tells your community that yes, we have what looks like extra money, but it's not extra money. It's money that's been budgeted and allocated for a particular purpose. That purpose just hasn't come to fruition yet. Like, we don't need our new roof yet, but we're gonna. We don't need our HVAC system redone, but we're gonna. Um, we are building a new building, or we are adding an addition. So, you don't want all of that money in your bank account, because then what happens is it looks like you have a ton of money. So when your municipality, again, a lot of times the city looks at your fund balance, they're like, well, why do we need to levy your millage when you have $200,000 in the bank? Well, that can be a difficult question to answer, right? Or you may have members of your community that say, why should I pay for a millage when you have all this money in the bank? Or rumor is that the library has tons of money. The perception is a lot of times municipalities look at libraries and they think you have tons of money. They think they see PPT coming in, they see penal fines coming in, they see all of this money coming in, and they think, well, they just have tons of money because they don't truly understand how a library works and what it costs to put together a library. So there are libraries in the state that have had some issues with their municipalities refusing to levy the full amount of their millage because of this perception that the library has a lot of money. So that's one of the things to look at in this discussion is look at your fund balance. If you have a huge fund balance, deal with that before you start determining how much money you're going to go for in your millage, because that will definitely hamper you. They will look at it. You will get questions about it. Your municipality will complain about it. And even if you're a district, right, your individual municipalities of whom sit on your board will probably question it. And your your public that's paying the millage, someone somewhere will question it, especially if there's other things that members of your community are complaining about in the library, whether there's a book challenge going on, or something else that's going on. It will just add to that kind of, issues that might be brought up as part of your millage campaign. Joe, you have anything you want to add on to that?
No, that pretty much hit it. Oh, the only other thing is, um, we've seen it. The taxpayer is not paying for you to hold a wad of money. They're paying you for library services. And we've had that argument too. We've heard that. Um, yeah, people are paying attention. That is a thing we've noticed over the last, gosh, it started pre-pandemic. People really started to dial in on the financial information. It's low-hanging fruit. It is open to the public. It's out there and people are looking at it. So yeah, definitely a huge fund balance. Um, Basically do what Claire said. Put it in, invest it, start a capital fund, make it have a plan for that money. This is where it is. This is why we need it here. And this is why there's not very often, but this is why there's so much of it, so yeah, I guess basically have a plan.
So there was a question about Headley. So Headley, um, Headley requires with Headley, the way that millages work at the local level, um, the authorized millage amounts get reduced dependent on taxable value. So if you're assessed property rates, um, um, so essentially the idea is that if you're in an area that has taxable values that are getting much higher, that are quickly getting higher, it's a way to kind of stabilize those property taxes. So if your assessed values are going higher than inflation, then there is a complicated kind of calculation that decides how much to reduce the millage by in order to kind of make it so that property taxes don't run away with inflating property values or inflating assessments. And so that's kind of the reason behind it, but the actual how it works is a little bit more complicated. And like I said, I'll find a good explanation that's not super technical because some of the ones I've read, I'm not a financial person. I'm not a math person. Let's put it that way. Financial concepts I understand, but math, um, I I will. They're just horrible. So I will find one that's good and I will use it, put it in our in the slides as one of the resources so that it's a little bit easier to understand. It was meant to help property owners, but it's not great for millage leviers. Gathering the information for a conversation about millages. Um, this is exactly what the May 4th session is going to be about. Um, the paying of property taxes is taboo. Yep. Um, this is exactly the information that we're going to talk about on May 4th. So I am, I would say as a start, I would look at your budget and I would look at your services that are most popular in your area and how the cost of those services are increasing, like Hoopla, um, and Overdrive, and how the cost of materials and the cost of staffing, and all of that kind of thing. All of the services that those areas like, what do your patrons use the most? What do your patrons love the most about your library? And how much do those things cost? And how is the library managing to pay for them? And that is kind of the tact that I would start with, to appeal to the if you have a tax resistant municipality, because it's all about, okay, what happens if you don't pay the tax? What is our library going to look like? And that's, I think, the piece that a lot of people don't understand, because a lot of people don't understand how libraries work. They just don't. I don't even think it's always that they think they don't want to pay for it. It's that they think that libraries have a lot of money, that they get a lot of money, and that so they're wasting money. So it's a matter of really kind of educating your municipality on, look, this is how much stuff costs. This is what we get. And the math is apparent. This isn't going to always work unless we get the money we need to supply what you want. Joe, you have anything?
No, I was just nodding my head along. Yep, that what she said.
Because the
Definitely.
reality is, if they don't pay for it, nobody else is going to. You'll get some
Right.
penal fines, you get some state aid, but that's it. There's no other way you get money. So, unless you have some fairy godmother,
And
if they don't pay for it, nobody else is going to want to.
state aid less is less than 2% of your budget.
Right.
For most libraries, it if it goes over 4%, I'd be shocked and amazed. So state aid's nice to have, and it opens up other doors because you get grants and E-rate out of it, not to mention the state aid. But it's the same thing with penal fines. Penal fines are based on human behavior. So we saw during the pandemic, penal fines went way down because there was no one on the road to ticket.
Hmm.
So um,
Right.
definitely, the millage is relatively compared to the other streams of income, your stable
Mhm.
stream of income. So
And if you look at what your community uses, so if they use, because I'll hear, well, my community says, well, people just can buy books on Amazon. Why do they need the library? Well, if your users use heavy overdrive and hoopla, well, how much would that cost them in Amazon? What's the average usage and what would that average cost be, you know, on Amazon? Or because audiobooks are expensive, right? And streaming on TV is getting more and more expensive every time. So again, leverage how the library is, yeah, you have to pay some, but you're not paying as much as you would if you had to go get this yourselves. Okay, thank y'all. Talk to y'all soon. Take care. Bye.